It was late summer, around 1:30 a.m. I was hauling a load of packaged goods across this desolate highway. No towns, no lights, nothing but the road and the stars. I was exhausted, been driving for 8 hours straight, and my fuel gauge was dangerously low. Up ahead, I saw a gas station. One of those tiny, flickering ones in the middle of nowhere. The kind of place you don't want to stop at, but you have no choice. I pulled in. The pumps were ancient, the neon sign buzzing weakly. The lot was empty, and the air smelled like gas and damp concrete. I filled up and stepped inside the little store to pay. The guy behind the counter was an older man, thin, wearing a faded uniform shirt. He just said, "Evening. Make it quick." I paid, grabbed my receipt, and went back to the truck. As I climbed in, I felt it, a headache, sharp and sudden, pounding at the base of my skull. I brushed it off. Must be fatigue. But as I started the engine, I noticed my vision blurring. The road ahead seemed to bend, not with the curves of the asphalt, but like it was stretching and twisting. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my head felt heavy, like it was about to split open. And then the truck jerked violently. I slammed my foot on the brakes. Nothing. The truck was sliding forward like the brakes weren't working. The headlights flickered, then went out. Pitch black. I fumbled for the lights, the hazard switch, my phone, nothing. The hum of the engine turned into a low growl. And then I smelled it. Sulfur. Smoke. Something burning. My stomach turned. I heard a scraping noise under the truck, like metal clawing concrete. I hit the horn, and it sounded wrong. Deep, hollow, like it came from somewhere inside the cab. Then came the pressure in my chest. Like something was sitting on me, pinning me to the seat. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision flickered again. And that's when I realized, the dashboard clock had stopped. The radio, the lights, the engine, everything dead. The only thing I could hear was that low growling. I don't know how long it lasted. Minutes? Hours? Felt like days. By some miracle, the truck started again. Lights flickered on, engine hummed normally, my hands unpinned themselves. I blinked, trying to shake it off. I looked in the rearview mirror. Nothing. The lot was empty again. No sign of the man behind the counter, no sign of anything unusual. Just me, alone. I tried to drive away, but my body felt different. Every bump on the road jolted me like needles through my skin. My heartbeat sounded like it was echoing in my skull. I had this sick feeling that something, whatever it was, had marked me. Or followed me. I didn't stop until dawn, and when I finally reached a diner in a small town, I tried to eat. Couldn't. My hands shook so badly I spilled my coffee. And then I noticed it, small burns, like cigarette marks, on my arms and neck. I didn't feel anything when they appeared. They were just, there. I've driven that route many times since, but I never go at night. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still feel that weight on my chest, that pressure in my head, the growl in the engine. I don't know what it was. I don't want to know. But it left me with a reminder I can't ignore. Some places don't just look abandoned. They're alive, and they're waiting. It was early fall. I was on a delivery route that took me through a huge stretch of farmland, flat, endless fields in every direction. No towns, no lights, just open land and the highway slicing through it. I'd done similar runs before, but this was the first time I'd been on this particular road. I left the last truck stop around 11 p.m. tired but alert. The air was cold, and I had my heater on low, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos. The field stretched out endlessly on both sides of the road, and the wind made the cornstalks rustle in a way that sounded almost like whispers. I chuckled to myself at first, probably just nerves and exhaustion. About an hour in, I noticed something in the field to my right. A faint glow. At first, I thought it was a farmhouse or some small shack. But the more I looked, the more I realized there was nothing there. Just the glow, hovering maybe 3 feet off the ground, moving slowly across the tops of the crops. My first thought was, probably some weird reflection, nothing to worry about. But then it started moving in ways that didn't make sense. Not in a straight line, not following the wind. It darted, paused, hovered, almost like it was studying me. I slowed down, keeping my eyes on it. That's when I noticed shapes in the glow. Figures. Tall, thin, impossibly lanky. I swear, they didn't walk, they glided just above the crops, limbs bending at angles they shouldn't. My stomach dropped, and my hands tightened on the wheel. I tried to convince myself I was hallucinating. I sipped the coffee, muttered to myself, and checked the rearview mirror. Nothing. The road behind me was empty, but the figures kept pace on my right, matching my speed, even though the fields were vast and I was moving at 60 miles per hour. I tried to turn on the radio, anything to break the tension. Static at first, then faint whispers, low and unintelligible. I laughed nervously, thinking it was the wind. But the whispers kept getting louder, rhythmic, almost like chanting. Then one of them, taller than the others, stepped out of the crops and onto the edge of the road. My headlights caught it for a second. Skin pale, almost reflective, no facial features, just darkness where a face should have been. I slammed the brakes, skidding a little on the asphalt. The figure didn't move like a normal creature. It just tilted, like it was stretching, bending in ways a human couldn't, then glided toward me. I panicked, threw the truck in gear, and gunned it forward. The glow from the field followed me. Every time I looked to the side, the figures were closer, gliding just above the crops, their limbs bending unnaturally. I tried to focus on the road ahead, but I could feel something pressing on the edges of my mind, like it was testing my sanity, poking at my thoughts. I reached a curve in the road and slammed on the horn. The figures paused, then retreated into the fields for a moment. I thought I might be safe. But then I noticed the headlights reflecting off something in the distance, a giant, skeletal shape rising up from the crops. It was impossibly tall, with limbs stretching toward the sky, glowing faintly in the moonlight. Its head was featureless, except for a single glowing slit, like an eye cutting across the field. I pressed the pedal to the floor, trying not to look. My coffee spilled all over my lap. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears, pounding, drowning out everything else. I don't know how long I drove like that, only glancing occasionally at the side mirrors. Sometimes the figures would appear in them, closer than they should have been, moving silently, gliding, always watching. By the time I finally reached a small town around 4 a.m. the road was normal again. The fields were just fields, the glowing figures gone. No trace of anything out of the ordinary. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel, and I had to pull into a diner to calm down. The waitress asked if I was okay. I said, just long hours, you know. She nodded and smiled. But I could see it in the shadows outside the window. The fields were empty, yes, but I knew they were waiting. The shapes, the tall ones, the glowing slit head, they were still out there, watching. Even now, when I drive long stretches of farmland at night, I keep my eyes on the crops. Every rustle makes me flinch. Every shadow makes me check the mirrors. Because some places are alive in ways you can't see. And whatever I saw that night, it didn't want to be seen. It wanted to follow. I was hauling a refrigerated load through a stretch of highway that cuts through a long forested region. The kind of place where there's no cell service for hours. I'd taken that route before, but this time, my delivery got delayed, and I had to drive through it at night. The sky was pitch black. No moon, no stars. Just my headlights cutting through the fog. I remember checking the dashboard clock, it was around 1:17 a.m. I had a thermos of coffee on the seat beside me, radio turned down low, and a packet of chips that I kept reaching for out of habit. The road was completely empty. I hadn't seen another car in at least an hour. At some point, I noticed something odd, a light in my rearview mirror. A single pair of headlights in the distance. At first, I thought it was another truck catching up, but after 10 minutes, it was still the same distance behind me. Not closer, not farther. Just, there. I switched lanes once, just to see what they'd do, and sure enough, the lights shifted with me, like whoever was behind me was mimicking every move. My first thought was, maybe it's another driver keeping pace for safety. Happens sometimes. So I brushed it off, but when I looked again a few minutes later, the lights were gone. Completely. Around 2 a.m., I started getting sleepy. My eyes were heavy, so I pulled over into one of those small rest areas, just a gravel patch with a street lamp and an old vending machine that probably hadn't worked in years. I parked, stretched, and stepped out to get some air. The forest was silent. Not even the sound of crickets, just the low hum of the truck's engine cooling down. I took a sip of coffee, leaned against the door, and looked down the empty highway. That's when I noticed something at the edge of the light. A figure. Not walking, not running, just standing. Right where the light faded into darkness. It looked like a person, maybe a man, but I couldn't see any details. Just the silhouette, completely still. I froze. For a moment, I thought maybe it was another driver stretching his legs, but there were no vehicles around. Mine was the only one. After about 30 seconds, I blinked, and the figure was gone. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself it was probably just my tired eyes playing tricks. I got back into the truck, locked the doors, and turned the ignition. The radio crackled for a second, then went silent. As I pulled back onto the highway, I looked in the mirror again, and my heart almost stopped. The figure was standing right in the middle of the road behind me, perfectly still, illuminated by my taillights. I pressed the gas and didn't look back. For the next hour, I just focused on the road. The fog had thickened, and my wipers were squeaking against the glass. My pulse wouldn't slow down. I kept telling myself it was just exhaustion. Maybe I dozed off for a second back there and imagined it. But then, around 3:10 a.m., I saw something ahead. A small wooden sign on the side of the road, last stop before tunnel. I didn't remember any tunnel on this route. I've driven it dozens of times. Still, I figured I must have missed it before. As I approached, I could see the tunnel entrance. It looked ancient, built out of rough stone, with no lights inside. Just a black hole cutting through the mountain. My GPS didn't show it, though, the screen just went blank. I slowed down and switched to high beams. Inside, the walls were damp, covered in moss, and my headlights barely cut through the darkness. Halfway through, I started hearing something strange, like someone whispering, but it wasn't from outside. It was inside the cab. At first, it sounded like static, then faint words. I turned off the radio completely, but it didn't stop. It was coming from behind me. I glanced into the mirror, and saw the faint outline of a person sitting in the passenger seat. I swear, I stopped breathing. I turned, and there was no one there. The whispering stopped. The tunnel ended a few seconds later, and I just kept driving. Didn't pull over, didn't stop until morning. When I finally reached the delivery site, I told one of the workers what happened, half joking, half terrified. The guy went pale and said something I'll never forget: "You must have taken the old forest road. They closed that section years ago. That tunnel collapsed after a trucker died inside." I didn't say anything. Just finished my delivery, parked the truck, and sat there for a long time, staring at the dashboard clock. I still take night routes sometimes. But I never, ever take that road again. And every time I drive through a tunnel, I can't help but glance at the passenger seat, just to make sure no one's sitting there. I was doing a long run, for states worth of deliveries, mostly refrigerated cargo. It was the middle of summer, and my AC wasn't working properly, so I was already in a foul mood. My shirt stuck to my back, and I'd been chewing gum just to stay awake. It was around 2:30 a.m. when my fuel gauge dipped near empty. I hadn't seen another vehicle for miles. Then I spotted a small gas station up ahead, old-fashioned type, one of those with a flickering tube light above the pumps and a small convenience store beside it. The sign said, "Open 24 hours," but the letters, 24, kept blinking on and off like they were tired of existing. I pulled in. The place was dead quiet. No attendant in sight. Just the hum of the refrigerator unit behind me and the faint buzz of that dying light. I got out, stretched a bit, and called out, "Hello." No answer. There was an old bell above the store door, so I pushed it open. The smell hit me first, a mix of kerosene, dust, and something faintly metallic, like old blood. The shelves were mostly empty, just a few cans of beans, some soda bottles, and newspapers stacked in a corner. Then I noticed the guy behind the counter. He was sitting on a stool, head tilted slightly down, reading a magazine. Thin man, maybe in his 50s, wearing a faded uniform shirt with "Ed" stitched on it. I said, "Hey, buddy, need to fill up the tank. You open?" He didn't look up right away. Just flipped a page and said, "Pump 3's working. Rest are busted." His voice was slow, raspy. I nodded and went out to fill up. But here's where it started to get strange. When I walked back to my truck, I realized there was no pump 3. Only 2 pumps, 1 and 2. Both looked ancient, rusted, like they hadn't worked in years. I went back in, thinking maybe I'd misheard him. I said, "Hey, I don't see a pump 3, man." He finally looked up. His eyes were bloodshot, and for a second, I thought maybe he'd been drinking. He smiled a little, or maybe it was just a twitch, and said, "Sure you do. It's right where you left it." That sentence made no sense. I stood there, confused. Then he said, "You must be tired, driver. Been a long road, huh?" And suddenly, I started feeling lightheaded. Like I'd been awake for too long. The air in that store was heavy. The ceiling fan spun lazily, and I remember staring at it for too long before shaking myself out of it. I decided to just leave. Maybe it was an old man losing it, maybe I was just exhausted. I walked out, and now there was a third pump. Standing there between the other 2. I swear to you, it wasn't there before. I froze. My heart was pounding, but I told myself, "You're just tired. Long hours. Hallucination, maybe." So I walked over, swiped my card, and filled the tank. The machine beeped like normal. Everything worked. When I went back to the store to pay, the guy was gone. The stool was empty. The magazine he'd been reading was still open, the pages yellowed, brittle. I looked closer and realized it was a car magazine from 1987. Something about that made my stomach twist. I dropped a couple of bills on the counter and walked out without saying a word. As I started the truck, I looked up in the side mirror, and the gas station looked wrong. Like it was further away than it should be. Dimmer. The sign wasn't blinking anymore, it was completely off. But here's the part that really messed with me. When I checked my bank statement the next day, there was a transaction listed from that night. But the location? The name of the gas station? It just said, Pump 3 Fuel Company, closed permanently. I asked around a few weeks later, out of curiosity. One old mechanic said there used to be a gas station there, but it burned down decades ago. Faulty wiring, they said. The attendant died in the fire. Name was Ed. I don't know what I saw that night. Maybe my mind was fried. Maybe exhaustion plays tricks, but I still have that receipt, old, faded, the ink half erased, and it's dated the same night. I've driven 1,000 roads since then, but every time I see an empty station on a lonely highway, I keep driving. Because some places don't want customers anymore. They just want you to stop. I was hauling furniture across a long stretch of empty highway. My route took me through a mountainous region I'd never been before. It was one of those places where your GPS flickers out and radio stations fade into static. The dispatcher warned me there'd be fog and some road closures, but I figured I'd be fine. By the time it got dark, I had about 80 miles left before my next rest stop. I wasn't tired, just bored, so I started humming along to an old song on my playlist, sipping coffee from my thermos. The fog was getting thick though, thick enough that my high beams were just bouncing back white. Around 11:30 p.m., I saw what looked like a small diner up ahead. Neon lights flickering, one old car parked outside. I hadn't seen a sign for miles, so I figured I'd stop for a quick coffee refill. When I pulled in, the gravel crunched under the tires, loud, sharp. The building was small, maybe 4 tables inside. The sign above the door just said "Eat." Half the bulbs were dead. I stepped inside, and immediately noticed how quiet it was. No music, no kitchen sounds, no chatter. Just the faint hum of a refrigerator somewhere in the back. There was a woman standing behind the counter. She was facing away from me, wiping something with a cloth. I said, "Hey there, you guys still open?" She turned slowly, and I remember thinking how pale she looked, like she hadn't seen sunlight in weeks. Her eyes seemed tired, but she smiled, just a little. "Coffee?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, setting a few bills on the counter. She nodded and disappeared into the back. I sat down at one of the booths, rubbing my eyes. My back was killing me from the drive, and I started scrolling through my phone, though there was no signal. That's when I noticed something. The car parked outside, it was gone. I didn't hear it leave, no door slam, no engine start. Just gone. A few seconds later, the woman came back with the coffee. I tried to make small talk, asked her if it was usually this quiet out here. She just looked at me, like she didn't understand the question, then said softly, "People don't stop here anymore." Something about the way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I finished half the coffee and decided to get back on the road. I thanked her, but when I turned to leave, I froze. There was a man sitting in the booth directly across from mine. I hadn't seen him come in. He was wearing a hat pulled low, both hands on the table. He didn't move, didn't look up, just sat there perfectly still. I stood there for a second, waiting for some kind of acknowledgement, but he didn't even twitch. I pushed the door open and stepped out, the little bell above it ringing sharply in the quiet air. When I looked back through the glass door, the woman and the man were both gone. The lights inside the diner were still on, but the place was completely empty. My stomach dropped. I got into my truck as fast as I could and pulled out of there. My hands were shaking on the wheel. I looked in the mirror, and for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing in the doorway, watching me leave. I didn't slow down. About 10 minutes later, I started feeling lightheaded. My throat was dry, and my stomach hurt. I glanced at the coffee cup sitting in the holder, and noticed something floating in it. A thin black strand, like hair. I rolled the window down and threw the cup out. I remember turning on the radio to calm myself down. Static, then silence, then a faint voice crackling through, just one sentence, "You shouldn't have stopped." I slammed the radio off immediately. I drove straight through the night and reached the rest stop around dawn. When I got there, I asked one of the attendants if there was a small diner back down that stretch of highway. He gave me a strange look and said, "There hasn't been one there in over 20 years. Burned down after a kitchen fire. Whole family died inside." I didn't say anything after that. Even now, when I drive night routes, I still sometimes think I see that flickering neon light up ahead in the fog. And every single time, I just keep going.